By the time Beethoven arrived on the musical scene in Vienna, the string quartet had established itself as a challenge to every series composer. There were enough imposing precedents from Haydn and Mozart alone. It was a challenge that Beethoven took up at 3 decisive stages in his career, so that the words early, middle, and late are particularly appropriate where the quartets are concerned. The opus numbers betray this. 6 quartets, opus 18, 3, opus 59, plus those 2 isolated works, opus 74 and 95, and finally the late series from opus 127 to 135. A quartet way of thought was, however, so much in the air that it affected other music too, the string section of the orchestra, for example, and even works for solo piano. Beethoven's Piano Sonata, opus 2, number 3, begins unmistakably in a quartet texture. And so does the E major Sonata, opus 14, number 1. Beethoven actually transcribed this work for quartet, although the finale with its left-hand arpeggios did demand some rethinking. Here's this theme in the quartet version, which Beethoven transposed up a semitone from E to F in order to raise the lower dominant, B, to the cello's lowest note, C. It's significant that Beethoven should have made this quartet version of a piano sonata. Arrangements the other way round were far more common. Piano versions of quartets or symphonies had a practical value. They made works more accessible for study, like Beethoven's own four-hand arrangement of the much later Grosse Fuge. But meanwhile, let's consider his first set of quartets, opus 18, which he completed when he was 30. The year was 1800, which also saw the performance of his first symphony. The numbering of the opus 18 set was not strictly in order of composition, but as opus 18 number 1 is the first in the book, we may as well look at it first. In the sketches, Beethoven became absorbed with an idea, presumably a unison idea, in common time, 4 in a bar. Beethoven's rewritings varied the rhythmic pattern but kept to the 4/4 time. On the page after that last example, however, the time changed to 3 in a bar. And this 3/4 time was preserved in the quartet itself. In the first record in this series, ABM 1, I quoted from the development section of this movement to show what that eventual opening phrase could yield. But for the moment, let's just continue where we left off. The gist of that cello and violin duet. This had in fact already been noted in the 4/4 sketches. The story that the slow movement of this quartet, Opus 18, number 1, was inspired by the tomb scene in Romeo and Juliet is borne out by a sketch for its ending with superimposed words in French, les derniers soupirs, the last sighs. The final cadence, the last sigh of all, was eloquently expanded in the quartet. Now let us look at the opening of the next quartet, Opus 18, number 2, which we heard at the beginning of this record. 2 sketches with the first bar intact. 1 continuing this way, the other with a half close and a more characterful rhythm, to become more sharply dotted in the finished work. The Adagio of Opus 18, number 2, like the first movement of the previous quartet, was sketched in 4/4 before becoming 3/4. Notice that its final form preserved this melodic outline, but with far more variety of movement. In a sketch for the finale, the opening cello theme has a fugal look about it. But this became more wittily conversational. And before leaving the Opus 18 quartets, just a glance at the variation theme of number 5, a sketch for a curved shape. But this was discarded in favor of a more simple walk up and down the scale. The sketches I've been discussing so far come from 2 books dating from 1798 and 99. They were investigated by Gustav Nottebohm and formerly belonged to F.A. Grasnick in Berlin. But there's further light on this variation movement of Opus 18, number 5, in the Kafka Miscellany in the British Museum, including some variation ideas. And there's one sketch for a minor key variation set out not on a single stave, but in score, although with only first violin and cello parts sketched in. As there isn't a minor key variation in the actual quartet, it's worth hearing this fragment even in its skeleton form. There, presumably, the filling in was abandoned as the variation itself was abandoned. However, within the many permutations of a quartet of players, there may be times when a cello and a violin do discuss matters between themselves. So let's jump forward to the second movement of Beethoven's quartet, opus 59, number 1, which opens in just this way. Cello and second violin, followed by viola and first violin. The repeated note motive went through various forms in the sketches. Let's hear now the ultimate form as it comes fortissimo on the whole quartet with its splendidly athletic leaps at the end. In contrast to this apparent simplifying process, the next theme worked the other way. The following sketch seems rhythmically dull. And especially when we compare it with its livelier outcome. These three middle period quartets, opus 59, are usually called Razumovsky after the Russian count who commissioned them, and each was supposed to incorporate a Russian theme. As it is, only two of them fulfilled this overtly. Beethoven noted two tunes from a folk song collection, one beginning as follows. And the other one, which incidentally also occurs in Mussorgsky's Boris, was this. Beethoven made no attempt to preserve the andante marking of the folk song collector, and he forced both themes to toe the line in contrapuntal treatment, the former in the finale of opus 59, number 1. The other Russian theme was used in the trio of the Allegretto in opus 59, number 2, and at its climax there's rough humor in its rough counterpoint. The sketches for this E minor Razumovsky, quoted briefly by Nottebohm, throw interesting light on all four movements. At the opening, we find an idea treated in sequence, which Beethoven was to expand. Apart from the stretching of the motive itself, there came two introductory chords that were themselves material for development. The opening chords, in fact, proved to be the basis of the theme itself. And then the slow movement, one of the most beautiful of Beethoven's chorale-like themes, which was to depend on its harmonization. Here, the harmony is only hinted at. And here's an alternative sketch for the second 4 bars. Beethoven asked for this movement to be played with great feeling, and the composer's own feeling was expressed in the subtlety and intensity of the harmonization. And here's a sketch for a minuet in E major, probably intended for the third movement. Possibly to offset its Russian theme trio section, this last idea was replaced by a minor key allegretto in 3/4 time, but otherwise far removed from a minuet in mood or rhythm. Whether by design or instinct, it's curious that all Beethoven's extended works in E, minor or major, have every movement in the tonic key, major or minor. So, in Opus 59, number 2, we find so far E minor for the first movement, E major for the second, E minor for the third, with its Russian trio in E major. And the finale, to preserve classical unity, also demanded the home key. In our first record, I described the way Beethoven avoided possible monotony by devising a rondo theme that leant heavily on another key, C major, so that the movement develops into a kind of gravitational struggle between C and E minor. Sketches show that this key conflict occurred to Beethoven well in advance of the character of the theme. A further sketch. And then a more decisive thematic figure. Which then acquired that slender upbeat idea, in itself a common enough cliché, but sufficient in Beethoven's hands to provide a lengthy, witty, and dramatic preparation for the return of the whole theme. Let's hear one of these returns in mid-movement. The eventual triumph of E minor over C major is left for the final presto, and yet in those early sketches the denouement must already have been envisaged. The third Razumovsky quartet is, however, definitely in C major. One sketch suggests a direct opening and is in fact marked third quartet. Once again, a process of expansion, incorporating much soloistic work from the first violin. oblique approach to this through an introduction enshrouded in harmonic mystery was an inspiration comparable to the opening of Mozart's so-called dissonance quartet. Here's Beethoven's opening of Opus 59, number 3. Among the sketches for this third Razumovsky, we find an idea in bare repeated notes. Half a dozen years later, this became the allegretto of the Seventh Symphony, but its key of A minor persisted in the quartet in a very different form. The minuet of Opus 59, number 3, was sketched in this way, in the subdominant key of F. The opening bar then takes another form. The sketch is in pencil, probably noted down on one of Beethoven's customary walks, and the added words finale C minor were certainly not followed up. He later continued in ink, but in the same key. Then he changed to C major, the home key of the quartet. And this we must hear on the quartet in its finished version. Now, note that the two lower strings play in contrary motion to the two violins. I'd like to make an experiment here and ask the viola to play his part with a slight change of emphasis. And there, surely, we find one of those hidden unities that abound without advertising themselves, the origin of the fugue subject that starts off the finale and into which the minuet leads. After composing the three Opus 59 quartets, Beethoven gave the form a long rest, with two exceptions. One was the E-flat quartet, Opus 74, nicknamed the Harp because of its pizzicato arpeggios in the first movement. The scherzo of the so-called harp quartet raises the whole question of key associations, conscious or subconscious. The key here is C minor, and a sketch for the movement runs as follows. And yet, the four-note motive of the Fifth Symphony and of the Piano Sonata These must have been at the back of Beethoven's mind. They were works written not long before. The quartet became rhythmically influenced. But at that point, the insistence on the motive has turned to the notes D flat and C. The same key as the Appassionata, and the key in which this identical figure appears, both in the Fifth Symphony and the G major piano concerto. But this Appassionata key, F minor, also ties up closely with the next quartet, opus 95. The Appassionata began with a move from this harmony to this. And the quartet opens with a similar harmonic move. And a few bars later, the Neapolitan inflection, the technical label for this flattened harmony, this is stressed from the start in this sketch for the opening of the finale of opus 95. Well, that is a mere outline of unbarred notes, although the rests suggest this rhythm for the theme. A later sketch, however, shows the pattern and the lead-in as we know it. And over that haunting reiterated phrase is written in the sketch, although not in the score, the word languente, languid, a clue perhaps to the particular kind of pathos required in spite of the tempo mark allegretto agitato. Quartet, opus 95, dates from 1810, and though its conciseness seemed to herald a new manner, and especially after the grand middle period scale of the three Razumovskys, it was 14 years before Beethoven returned to the string quartet for the great works of his last years. They proved to be his last testament, later even than the last piano sonatas, the Missa Solemnis, and the Ninth Symphony. The slow movement of opus 127, for which sketches appear in 1824, the year of the completion of the Ninth Symphony, and in Nottebohm's words, each section, each limb of the variation theme is found by laborious stages. As Nottebohm described it, the birth was long and difficult. On page 3 of this sketchbook, the rising phrase we just heard is found, but note the shorter short notes. Then a simpler notation, but with a conventional ornament. The movement was to be in variation form, so perhaps in relation to that, the theme was copiously worked upon in different keys and characters, especially in C major and in simple common time instead of 12/8. then a preoccupation with counterpoint. In this key, a glimpse of the rising sequences of the second part of the theme. Further on, a return to the original key of A-flat and a more expressive treatment of the sequences. But C major as a kind of neutral ground returns. Yet in its very basic notation, the melodic outline of this last sketch is surprisingly complete. Compare the score itself. Sketches in C major, however, persist as details of scoring emerge. A different character, an allegro grazioso, develops. Here's a two-part sketch with the cello above, the viola below. And an example of double or invertible counterpoint. This lighter-hearted treatment of the theme vanished as work on Opus 127 proceeded. But if we turn to another sketchbook of the same year, 1824, we shall find Beethoven more and more absorbed in abstract musical problems. A four-bar phrase. Followed by a precise inversion. So let's now hear how this bore fruit in the third movement of Opus 127. In the sketchbook from which I just quoted, there's also much material relating to the quartet in A minor, Opus 132. With a significant alteration. But among these sketches, contrapuntal experiments play an important part with a four-note motive. This motive, in this kind of treatment, opened Opus 132. Later, in the first movement of Opus 132, this idea revealed itself as a counter-subject to the other theme I played before. It was while sketching this movement of Opus 132 that those four notes suggested a more exhaustive fugal treatment, They are noted down in a variety of note values. Well, these led in due course to a different work, the original finale of another quartet, the B-flat, opus 130. A movement eventually separated from it to become the Grosse Fuge, opus 133. But on the subject of relationships between different works, a word about the finale of the A minor. This had as its source a rejected orchestral theme for the finale of the Ninth Symphony. When the choral finale of the Ninth took over, this last theme found its more intimate nature and most perfect form as the last movement of the A minor quartet. In relation to this A minor quartet, Nottebohm quoted the following A major theme. But another sketch appears in B flat. And it eventually found its place in opus 130, sketched with a further change of key, G major. Was it then coincidence or key association that led Beethoven's steps to the key in which much earlier he'd written that other alla tedesca movement in the Piano Sonata, opus 79, with an inversion of the same opening notes? In the opus 130 quartet, however, the treatment was infinitely more personal in its dynamics and phrasing. In opus 130, this movement is followed with the intensely personal cavatina, which appears in the first extended sketch as a continuous melodic line. Subsequent sketches suggest, however, that the overlapping phrases of first and second violins were implied, as they occur in the quartet. The cavatina of opus 130. But to return to counterpoint and the Grosse Fuge, which originally followed this movement. Seeds for this had already been planted during work on opus 132. In the sketches, Beethoven appeared to be searching for suitable counter-subjects. Then came an idea characterized by wide leaps and marked this one forte. And in a still more energetic rhythm, this was to dominate the first large section of the grosse fuga, and in an unremitting fortissimo. Beethoven's C-sharp minor quartet, opus 131, also began with a fugue, but of a very different character. The subject of this opus 131 fugue might be arranged anagrammatically to form a near relation of the grosse fuga subject. And it has a grave character, rather like Bach's C-sharp minor fugue from Book 1 of the 48. Once again, key associations? Perhaps. Beethoven had been brought up on the 48 in his young days at Bonn, and his late absorption in fugal writing included sketches for an overture on the musical letters B, A, C, H. Also, notice a four-note figure like the grosse fuga and opus 131. So let us end by looking at the sketches for the finale of opus 131, a work unique among the Beethoven quartets in being played without a break between any of the movements. This at least establishes the tessitura of the theme, which then takes this form. And with a far more dramatic punctuation, this. There's also another version in 6/8 time. Elements from both these last sketches were to combine. Much will continue to be written about the hidden unities of great works, and much has been written about links between the late Beethoven quartets. The contours of this last theme could be traced to the grosse fuga or the A minor quartet, opus 132, and indirectly to the opening of opus 131 itself. We know from Beethoven's sketches that the creation of these works overlapped. So here's another permutation of that last example. This also plays its part in the finale of opus 131, and even the non-analytical listener is aware of its fittingness. After opus 131, Beethoven composed the F major quartet, opus 135, and the comparatively lightweight finale that replaced the grosse fuga of opus 130. This general survey of the quartets has intended to illustrate some of Beethoven's working methods as revealed in his sketchbooks. The sketchbooks also reveal many projects that he never completed, like the overture on VIII and the 10th Symphony. Alongside this sketch, Anton Schindler wrote Scherzo for the 10th Symphony, although from our knowledge of Beethoven's other sketches, it would be hard to predict the form it might have taken if Beethoven had lived to complete it. As it turned out, his last important works remained the late quartets, the medium by which he had long set such great store.